This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The Taliban says it will not agree to a deadline extension for ongoing evacuations. Gunmen in Nigeria killed 2, abduct 1 in a raid on an army training base. And Zambia's longtime opposition leader takes the oath of office as the country's president. President Hakainde Hichilema has promised to address Zambia's economic crisis. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the latest in business is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. South Africa's unemployment rate hits an all-time high of 34.4% in the second quarter of 2021. And Egypt will be issuing its first ever sovereign sukuk bond in the first 6 months of 2022. We'll have the details on those stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thank you for that, Rama. We begin this news hour in Afghanistan, where the Taliban has promised to reject any plans to extend evacuations beyond the end of the month. Time is running out for airlifts out of Kabul ahead of an August 31st deadline for American troops to leave Afghanistan. During a news conference, the Taliban also discouraged Afghans from leaving the country. Ismailai Abbasin has more.
The conference, which is held for the second time by Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid this evening in Kabul at the GMIC, Government Media and Information Center, he was pointing to some very major issues like opening the banks. He said it will take 1 or 2 days to open the banks and things are getting to normal and the routine life of the people are getting normal too. And at the same time, he was pointing to some reforms on the Taliban rankings, and he said that there might be some cases of misconducting, and he said we are working on this and we will do our best to avoid all those actions. He also satisfied the media family in Afghanistan that be sure about their security and we will do our best to avoid these things. One of the journalists asked that there is a television, local television in Afghanistan, and surrounded by the Taliban forces, and he said there might be some cases, but due to security situation, they will avoid if there is no security problem. While he also pointed some other problems to like Panjshir Valley problem, where Ahmad Massoud, son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, along with Amrullah Saleh and other Northern Alliance commanders are still resisting. He said that we are trying our best to solve the problem through diplomatic channels and through negotiation, and this problem will be solved. Also, he reminded of the ministerial system that they are working on. The finance and education ministers are just appointed. At the same time, he was also emphasizing to work along with former government officials like Kabul Mayor, Minister of Health, and some governors like Kandahar. So these are all the issues that he was emphasizing on.
The virtual G7 meeting on Afghanistan hosted by UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson ended just a short while ago. G7 member countries look to create a coordinated plan on Afghanistan. CGTN's Naweed Jabrakal now joins us live from London. Naweed, thank you so much for joining us. Naweed, we're told that U.S. President Joe Biden plans to stick with the August 31st deadline for Kabul evacuations. What are you hearing from the just concluded meeting?
Yeah, shortly after this meeting finished, the White House putting out a photo on Twitter of the president meeting the other leaders, the G7 group of rich nations consisting of the United States, this country, the UK, which currently has the presidency, as well as Japan, Canada, Italy, Germany and France. It wasn't just those leaders meeting, but also the head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, as well as European leaders such as Charles Michel and Ursula von der Leyen, and the head of NATO as well, indicating the fact that these countries want to try and get an international response, an international team together to deal with what's happening in Afghanistan at the moment. Remember, the Taliban was a force that they were fighting the Western coalition was fighting for the past 20 years alongside Afghan forces. But in terms of President Biden's decision, it seems that he's going with the Pentagon on this, going with his national security team. That's what the Reuters news agency reported, sticking to that August 31st deadline because the Americans believe they can get their citizens out by then. Now, getting their citizens out by then doesn't mean getting Afghans who've helped the United States and Western forces out by then. So it means that there could be some people left behind. That was the concern for Boris Johnson and other leaders as well. France and Germany had called for this extension in recent days, as well as Spain as well. But no indication that President Biden, excuse me, is going with that. Also partly because it's not just President Biden's decision. The Taliban have a role to play here as well. As we've been hearing, the Taliban says they don't want an extension. The agreement they have in place was August 31st. They want the US to stick to that. And in a bid to try and ramp up some pressure, it says no more Afghan nationals will be allowed to approach the airport and enter on these evacuation flights out of Kabul. And just in terms of figures, the speed at which the people are leaving Kabul really ramping up. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson in the past half an hour or so saying 9,000 people have left in terms of the UK. The US, far bigger a number because of its far bigger role in the war, almost 70,000 people, according to the Pentagon. Hannah.
Naweed, that's quite an important point that you raised, and that was from earlier reports today as well, that it was being reported that Taliban no longer allowing Afghans to evacuate from Kabul airport. What are international leaders who were at this meeting making of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a difficult issue for them to grapple with. As I mentioned, their involvement in Afghanistan wasn't always viewed positively by a lot of Afghans. Also, their backing of the government not seen as something that was really helpful in terms of the progress of Afghanistan, for some Afghans, that is. But in terms of how international leaders have responded to this, it's really a big question. How does the international community, how does the US, how does the UK and other powers deal with the Taliban? There seems to be some acceptance. We heard from Boris Johnson, who said that there was, quote, agreement on a roadmap to dealing with the Taliban, indicating that they will have to work with the Taliban, that it seems to be the dominant force in the country at the moment. We've just been hearing from Zambian there how there are pockets of resistance, but really the nature of what's happened in the past few weeks has really turned this war in the Taliban's favor. They have now moved in on Kabul, and so the Western community trying to formulate a united response. That's why the UN was involved with this, and that's why the European Union was involved in this. Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, saying that they had a, quote, moral duty to keep helping Afghanistan, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that money will continue to be going there. Aid and humanitarian assistance was another thing that was on the agenda today, because there could be another refugee crisis impending for Afghanistan, a country which has now experienced more than 42 years of war, going all the way back to the Soviet invasion in 1979. But just in terms of what the Taliban has had to say, they're also concerned about letting Afghans leave, because remember, a lot of the people going out on these flights are people who speak good English, for example, leaders, activists, journalists, for example, women's rights champions, and they're worried about a potential brain drain as well. They said that, quote, Zabiullah Mujahid, he said, we asked the Americans, don't encourage Afghans to leave, we need their talent. So the Taliban itself now looking at formulating a government in Afghanistan and trying to rebuild that nation. But the Western powers, it seems from this G7 leaders meeting, agreeing that they need to now work with the Taliban, but how that will happen, particularly with issues like human rights, women's rights, education, healthcare, all of that still remains very much up in the air.
Naweed, I mean, I was just reading a report earlier on the WHO, for instance. I mean, other issues that are arising from what's happening in Afghanistan right now. The WHO, for instance, was just speaking about medical supplies and that they only have about a week's worth of medical supplies. What else came out of this meeting, and were there any other resolutions regarding what's happening in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think the issue of humanitarian assistance is really, really important, because what the West is trying to do now is, if there is an acceptance that they need to work with the Taliban, they also want a political settlement that will bring in other Afghan powers. We've been hearing about the Northern Alliance, or the now toppled government, a lot of their leaders in exile, but bringing those people in is going to be incredibly important if this country, which has experienced so much bloodshed and conflict in recent decades, is going to have a peaceful future. And that's what Boris Johnson really wanted to focus on today, the idea of an inclusive government, how they're going to do that with the Taliban, which seem to have the bits between their teeth at the moment, at least in terms of controlling the majority of territory there, just days before the US and foreign troops leave the country, is going to be a tall order, particularly if you think about some of the historical animosity in the war in Afghanistan. But aside from that humanitarian response, also looking at the refugee crisis, Angela Merkel, as I mentioned, saying that Germany was going to provide 100 million euros, that's about $120 million of aid for refugee assistance. It could, she said, provide another 500 million euros. That money will be really, really important, not just in terms of helping what's happening on the ground now, but also neighbouring countries. Remember, a lot's been made about the UK and Western countries taking in refugees, but it's usually the countries around the conflict zones which usually bear the brunt of refugee crises and humanitarian crises, the likes of Pakistan, the likes of Iran, trying to make sure that those countries are helped, for example. But then also the security situation. One thing that Boris Johnson insisted on was that the Taliban have to make sure that there's going to be no return to, for example, terror, as he called it, or any terror attacks from Afghan soil, something that they say, if you look at what's happened in the past 20 years, according to both President Biden and Boris Johnson, the mission in Afghanistan has been a success.
And we thank you so much for all that comprehensive reporting. Nawija Bako speaking to us from London. Well, we turn our attention to Nigeria now, where officials there say gunmen have killed 2 Nigerian military personnel. The attack took place at an army training college in Kaduna State. The academy's spokesperson, Major Bashir Muhtajira, says the gunmen gained access to the area early in the morning. According to him, 1 soldier was kidnapped by the attackers. Army units and other security agencies are reportedly attempting to rescue the kidnapped victim. Well, for more on that attack, we're now joined by CGTN's Phil Haza, who is in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Hi, Phil. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Any word on the soldier who was kidnapped and about this particular attack on the elite military academy in Kaduna, Phil?
Well, thanks, Hannah. Thanks for having me. It's quite an unfortunate incident that has occurred yet again, in Nigeria, in the northwestern part of the country. As of now, there's no detail about the whereabouts of the missing soldier or officer, because he's actually an officer, he's a major. But according to the spokesman, he says that a combined team of the military and other security operatives are currently on the hot pursuit of the criminals, because they actually gained entrance into the facility from the main gate, the security gate. They were dressed in military uniforms, and they went straight to the officers' quarters, and with the aim, of course, to abduct more than 1 officer, but they killed 2 and went away with 1 through a nearby bush inside the massive facility. It's quite an unfortunate incident, because this particular area, this ward, is also one that has witnessed several attacks, including the kidnap of some students from the College of Forestry and Mechanization. It's also an area where the Federal Airport Authority, witnessed an attack as well recently. So it's quite a very disturbing news, the fact that this is supposed to be one of the most guarded facilities in the country, because you're talking about a defense academy that has the presence of the Army, the Air Force, and of course the Navy. But as with regards the whereabouts of the missing soldier, we just have to keep monitoring the correspondence from the military to know how far that operation is successful.
Well, Phil, just as you've said, this military base was deemed to be quite secure from everything that you've said as well. Just it had so much defense happening there. This seems to be quite brazen of gunmen to attack a military base. What is the government's response to this particular attack on the base been?
Yes, indeed. Brazen is the word. Daring is the word. I mean, they must have had some kind of audacity. Security operatives are saying that definitely they had some kind of support, or maybe from a mole in the security apparatus of that facility, to be able to gain entrance in such a guarded environment or facility. It also has sent a lot of fear and concern or worry to lots of Nigerians. If you speak to an average Nigerian on the street, they tell you how that they are afraid of the kind of attacks, the nature of the attacks, from schools to travelers to communities where monarchs are kidnapped, and then the security formations of the country. Don't forget that recently we also saw attacks in the southeastern part of the country of police formations, and so a nature of attack of this sort is quite disturbing, and critics say that I mean, they're worried of a failed state if this continues unabated. But again, from the government's perspective, the best that we've heard so far is the statement by the spokesperson of the NDA. And he says that as long as there's a combined approach towards pursuing these criminals, that they will definitely find a major and rescue him in no time. There's also air surveillance at the moment combing the area, because it's a large facility and it also borders some bush or forest. And so it's believed that that's the route that these criminals must have taken. But how they're going to rescue him, ensuring that he's rescued alive, it's something that, I mean, will have to be a sophisticated operation, and we'll have to monitor as well to give you that update.
Philly Haza, thank you so much for all that. Well, militant attacks in the Sahel are causing widespread instability. In Niger, the country's agriculture sector has been hard hit by multiple terrorist attacks. Asatal has more.
Niger's northern Tillaberi region has borne the brunt of several militant attacks. The rising insecurity has forced herders and farmers to flee.
If the security situation continues to get worse, then herders will no longer be able to take their livestock to grazing areas. You see, this will have a big impact on livestock. As far as agriculture is concerned, the terrorists are asking farmers to leave their fields, which represents a huge risk for food security.
The attacks have also led to periodic closures of borders with countries like Burkina Faso, Benin, and Mali. This has hit traders hard, forcing them to increase the price of food.
Because of the insecurity in the north of Niger and the closure of the border, the price of food products has doubled in Niamey. Many of our products are out of stock, yet it is important to get supplies. But where can we get supplies, and at what price?
The economy of Niger is reliant on agriculture and livestock. A UN report estimates that 80% of the population relies on agriculture for their livelihoods. Beyond issues of insecurity, extreme weather events like drought have also hit the sector hard. Astatal, CGTN.
Over to the Horn of Africa now, where Al-Shabaab insurgents are said to have ambushed a military base in Galmudug. Eyewitnesses in Amara say the assault happened on Tuesday morning. A suicide bomber is said to have detonated a device before gunmen launched attacks on the base. It is not yet clear how many people were killed in the strike. Before government forces took over Amara, it had been an Al-Shabaab stronghold. Well, to bring us the latest on that story, we're joined by freelance journalist Muhammad Kahia Muhammad, who is in Mogadishu. Muhammad, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Al-Shabaab seems to be gaining ground in areas it lost a few years ago. What do you see as being the reasons for that, Muhammad?
Well, not really. It's the other way around, whereby the group have been losing control of areas that they have previously been controlling. A good example is the Lower Shebelle region, where the group have been stronger and still stronger. And in the past 2 years, following military operations by the Somali forces, backed by the international peacekeepers such as AMISOM, the group have lost some significant agricultural towns, which they have been controlling for the past 6 to 7 years. A good example is Odigle and Anole and Sebit, which the group tried to retake several times but failed. But also, as you said today, the attack in Amara in Galmudug state whereby the Somali troops and regional forces in that part of the country have launched operations in the past 2 months, retook villages and towns previously controlled by Al-Shabaab, and now they are closing in on one of the last main strategic town that was controlled by Al-Shabaab in the past 10 years, which is Harardere. So the groups are trying to lose some ground. And it's like there are some few instances whereby, like today, a group tries to attack a town held by government forces, and then the troops retreat in what the defense minister says it is a tactical, and then they move in again. So the groups are losing a lot of grounds, but they're trying to hold the Somali troops from one of their strongholds to keep them off, which, that's Harardere.
Thank you so much for all that, Mohammed. Freelance journalist Mohammed Kakia Mohammed speaking to us from Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. We head over to Southern Africa now, where Zambia's newly elected leader, Hakainde Hichilema, has been sworn in. The veteran opposition figure won the presidential election by nearly 1 million votes. This election marked Hichilema's 6th time vying for the presidency. Zambia also swore in its second female vice president, Mutale Nalumango. Both the new president and his VP come into office as Zambia faces several economic challenges, among them the country's inflation, which broke past 22% earlier this year. With further analysis on this development in Zambia, we're joined by Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, political analyst at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much for joining us, Emmanuel. In his inauguration speech, President Hichilema promised Zambians that change had arrived. He also spoke of tackling the country's debt and other economic challenges. What kind of changes do you foresee the president-elect making?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to your program, and congratulations to the newly elected President and Vice President of the Republic of Zambia. Well, if you look at the trajectory that Zambia has been on for the last 7 years under the presidency of Edgar Chagbalungu, you would expect that the changes that Hakainde Hichilema will embark on are the changes that are going to win over the confidence of the investor community, especially from the West. Because what we have seen is that there was debt, external debt that was spiraling out of control, and much of it was not coming from the West, so to say, who are the traditional powerhouses when it comes to contracting debt in Zambia. And then those are the people that actually lost confidence in the Republic of Zambia in terms of doling out loans that were actually aimed at servicing debt. So at the moment, I expect that President Hakainde Hichilema will embark on a honeymoon kind of phase with the West, and that means of course liberalizing Zambia's economy even more, making sure that things such as civil liberties are playing out in such a way that they're going to win the confidence of the West, and then put the country back on a growth trajectory. Because at the moment we have been through inflation, hyperinflation, and that was not actually, as the previous regime would want to say, was not solely because of the coronavirus pandemic. These are crises that have been happening even before the onset of the coronavirus pandemic.
Speak to us, Emmanuel, about some of these challenges, how the new president is going to have to navigate through the challenges to be able to deliver on the promises that he's made to the Zambian people.
First of all, the major thing is the debt that has risen, I think, about even almost 7 times, because in 2011 our external debt stood at 1.9 billion United States dollars, and this is in an economy that whose per capita GDP is about 26 billion. The aggregate GDP is 26 billion United States dollars. But today our debt stands at more than 12.5 billion, and the IMF has been very reluctant in contracting debt, in actually helping the Zambian government with a loan procurement process. So obviously we have to expect that Hakainde Hichilema will appoint a team of competent administrators who win over the confidence of the people who can actually give Zambia debt. Because what has been happening, especially since 2018, when the Zambian government demanded that Alfredo Boldini, who was the IMF representative of the Republic of Zambia, was withdrawn from the Republic of Zambia. It was then that actually the confidence of the IMF in Zambia's economy even took a dive. So what are the personnel that Hakainde Hichilema is going to embark on? And not only that, how is he going to diversify the economy? Because Zambia has a pathological, chronic, and suicidal dependency on copper as the mainstay of its economy. So what are the ideas that Hakainde Hichilema will have in terms of diversifying the Zambian economy? And it is only those things that are going to win over the confidence of the investors, apart from the people that have proved to be the dependable partners in helping Zambia out of the morass that it has been in since 2015, 2014.
Thank you so much for joining us, Emmanuel Matamba, political analyst with the University of Johannesburg. Well, Algeria's foreign minister says the country is cutting diplomatic ties with Morocco. He accused Morocco of hostile actions. Both countries have had strained relations for decades. Algeria claims Morocco backed a group responsible for the wildfires which ravaged the country. Algeria has been fighting multiple wildfires since early August. It has blamed arsonists for starting a majority of the blazes. Over 20 people were arrested in connection to the fires. Well, let's now take a short break and return. More news making headlines here on Africa Live, including children in sub-Saharan Africa among those most affected by climate change. And Tunisia's President Said extends suspension of parliament and lifting of MPs' immunity.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. A new report by the United Nations Children's Fund says children living in the Central African Republic, Nigeria, Chad, Guinea, and Guinea-Bissau are most at risk of bearing the impact of climate change. The report released by UNICEF ranks countries based on children's exposure to climate change and environmental shocks like cyclones and heat waves. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy reports.
The findings by UNICEF highlights how climate change impacts threaten children's health. In Africa, for example, children in the Central African Republic, Chad, Nigeria, Guinea, and Guinea-Bissau are the most at risk. The report provides new global evidence on how many children are currently exposed to a variety of climatic and environmental hazards, shocks, and stresses. Now, let's take a quick global overview of the current situation. According to UNICEF, over 1/3 of children globally are currently highly exposed to water scarcity. It is feared the situation could worsen with frequent droughts, resulting in depletion of available water resources. Now, an estimated 600 million children globally are exposed to vector-borne diseases, such as malaria and dengue. Now, this number is expected to rise as temperature suitability and climatic conditions for mosquitoes and pathogens that transmit these diseases spreads. Now, approximately 2 billion children globally are reportedly exposed to air pollution. Now, this, the report says, could get worse unless there is a reduction in fossil fuel combustion that causes air pollution. Now, over 400 million children are currently exposed to cyclones. As high-intensity cyclones increase in frequency, rainfall intensity grows, and cyclone patterns shift, there are concerns the situation could only get worse. Now, 2020 was reported to be the hottest year on record, with over 800 million children exposed to heat waves globally. But as global average temperatures increase and weather patterns become more erratic, the number could double. Now, the UNICEF report recommends increased investment in climatic adaptation as well as reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to protect vulnerable children. Back to you.
Well, for more analysis on that story, earlier we spoke with Dr. Samuel Godfrey, UNICEF regional advisor. We began by asking him what climate and environmental hazards are having devastating impacts on the well-being and future of children.
The recent CCRI report, which is the Climate Crisis and Child Rights report, is really emphasizing that the climate crisis is a child rights crisis. And essentially, it shows a combination of both the exposure to climate and environmental hazards that children are exposed to, but also the vulnerabilities. And the vulnerabilities, as we know, within East and Southern Africa are extremely high, and children are very much in the center of those vulnerabilities. Well, almost every child around the world, more than 99% of children around the world are exposed to at least one of these climate and environmental hazards or shocks. And the report that UNICEF has released this week indicates that. And nearly 850 million of those children, about 1/3 of all the children in the world, now live in countries where they are exposed to 4 or more overlapping climate and environmental shocks. So approximately 1 billion children living in 33 countries are living in areas of extremely high risk from the impact of climate change. So given that this is the case, there are a number of things that can be done, and this report outlines a few of them. The first of them is really to reflect the voices of young people, children and the youth, in the NDCs, which are the nationally determined contributions and commitments of governments towards climate change. But equally, it's very important that, as it outlines in this report, that there is a clear focus on mobilizing climate finance towards climate adaptation programming for children.
Tunisian President Kais Saied has extended the exceptional measures he took on the 25th of July, including the suspension of the country's parliament. The initial move followed weeks of protests in the country against socio-economic, political and health situation. Reporting from Tunis, here's Adnan Shawashi.
The head of state declared that he will address the nation in the next few days to explain his plan. Kais Saied noted that the previous government and frozen parliament had failed to stabilize Tunisia.
I took this decision because it's my duty to safeguard the Tunisian state as stipulated by the constitution. Unfortunately, some people are still talking about a so-called coup. I have respected Article 80 of the Constitution, which says the president has all powers when a danger is threatening the country. The state and its vital services are functioning normally until I announce a new government within days.
Experts believe that the president plans to reform Tunisia's political system. Therefore, it is quite likely that he will not allow the resumption of the activities of the House of People's Representatives.
No matter what happens, it's impossible to resume the work of Parliament, which ended on July 25th. The President and the Tunisian people strongly oppose this return. The President's project is clear. He wants to change Tunisia's political system to a presidential one. He believes that many Tunisians want to elect a president who rules the country. The previous parliamentary system with limited presidential powers caused the deep political, social and economic crisis.
Political analysts say the head of state's successful COVID-19 crisis management strategy has made him regain the confidence of the population. In addition, Saied's aggressive tone towards corrupt businessmen has given him credit in the ongoing anti-graft campaign.
The president succeeded in providing millions of vaccines in a few weeks. The COVID-19 crisis is under control because the presidency stepped up the vaccination drive. He also threatened corrupt people who monopolize food products and steal from state resources. He gained popularity because, unlike in the past, the health and the economic issues are being given priority.
Since July 25th, the head of state has appointed 4 state officials. They are in charge of managing the Interior and Health Ministries, as well as the Finance in the ICT departments, until the designation of a new Prime Minister. The Tunisian president has rejected all roadmap initiatives and several calls for dialogue from political parties, civil society organizations and labor unions. Kais Saied declared that he will only listen to the people and respect the Tunisian constitution. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, as African countries step up their COVID-19 vaccinations, governments across the continent are facing the challenge of tackling vaccine hesitancy. Health officials say that they want to ensure that there are enough vaccines and that they're administered quickly enough despite reservations by some people to get inoculated. CGTN's Enoch Sequoia tells us more.
When Lemura Moile arrived at Bisley Health Center, 114.7 kilometers southwest of the Kenyan capital Nairobi, he had a fixed mind. The man from the Maasai community was here seeking protection against COVID-19, and he knew that getting vaccinated will help his cause.
I will go and tell people, especially my age mates, some of whom are here, that this disease adversely affects us old people. I will tell them to come here to Bissell Health Center to get vaccinated.
Since the exercise began in March, the Kenyan government has prioritized the vaccination of persons aged 58 years and above. They are the most vulnerable group against the virus. According to government statistics, 70% of 4,497 COVID-19 related deaths reported in Kenya have occurred in persons in this age group. But the slow uptake of vaccines by people in this category has left the government concerned. Of the estimated 2.6 million people in this category, only 300,000 have received a COVID-19 jab.
It is therefore a matter of great urgency that we get 2.3 million people in this category quickly vaccinated to protect their lives.
On Monday, Kenya received 880,000 doses of Moderna vaccines donated by the United States. In total, Kenya has received 3.6 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines. But the attention is vaccine hesitancy, and the entire continent seems to be suffering from it. In many African countries, the slow rollout of vaccines is not just a result of poor planning, logistics, and clinical resource challenges. It is also being driven by vaccine skepticism and hesitancy. Many people just don't trust the vaccines. There are concerns about vaccine safety and perceptions of the risk of getting infected.
These are the first Moderna vaccines to arrive in Kenya, and they are the same safe and effective Moderna vaccines which are being used to vaccinate Americans in the United States.
And no vaccine, I repeat, no vaccine is superior to the other when it comes to prevention of severe diseases and prevention of death.
In countries like Kenya, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, governments have been forced to order civil servants to get vaccinated or risk disciplinary actions. But as Nandoye Oleyele, a resident of a remote village in Kenya, would prove, lack of information could also be driving the hesitancy.
I've been hearing on the radio that there's a vaccination drive going on, and I decided to also come and get vaccinated.
The Kenyan government says it plans to ensure over 10 million people are fully vaccinated before the year ends. Enoch Sequoia, CGTN.
Well, I'll be standing by to bring you more on Africa Live, but for now, the latest in business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. South Africa's unemployment rate hits an all-time high of 34.4% in the second quarter. And Egypt says it will issue its first ever sovereign sukuk bond in the first 6 months of 2022.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Let's start in Africa's most industrialized economy. South Africa's unemployment rate went up by 180 basis points to a record high of 34.4% in the second quarter compared to the first quarter of 2021. That is the highest reading on record ever since Statistics South Africa's quarterly labour force survey started in 2008. According to Stats SA, the number of unemployed persons went up by nearly 600,000 to 7.8 million quarter-on-quarter. Job losses in the 3 months to the end of June were concentrated in finance. That sector shed nearly 280,000 jobs. Community and social services shed another 166,000 and manufacturing lost 83,000 jobs. The number of people who are not economically active for reasons other than discouragement also eased by about 571,000 between the two quarters, and that resulted in a net decrease of 386,000 in the number of persons who are not economically active. On to North Africa now. Egypt is gearing up to issue its first sovereign sukuk in the first half of 2022, with the relevant regulations expected to be completed within the next 3 months. The country's finance minister, Mohamed Maït, says that the government is planning to form a state-owned company to manage the issuance of these Sharia-compliant bonds. Now, the sukuk aims to attract new Egyptian and foreign investors to invest in the country in accordance with the principles of Sharia law in both Egyptian pounds, US dollars, and a whole range of other currencies. The money raised through the sukuks will contribute to funding state investments in social and economic development projects. Zambia's new president, Hakainde Hichilema, has pledged to rein in public debt and the budget deficit while restoring the nation's fiscal credibility after it became the continent's first pandemic-era defaulter on its Eurobonds. Mr. Hichilema was sworn in on Tuesday, and he takes over an economy that's buckling under record levels of external debt. The country's economic output contracted by 3% last year. Headline inflation is almost at 25%, and youth unemployment in the Southern African nation is sky high. One of the new administration's top priorities will be to win the IMF's endorsement for an economic recovery program. Mr. Hichilema also needs to mend ties with copper producers who generate over 70% of export earnings in order to unlock some $2 billion in stalled investments. Zimbabwe's government says the country has received nearly $1 billion in special drawing rights, or SDRs, from the International Monetary Fund. That funding is part of $650 billion worth of SDRs, which the IMF is distributing to members in proportion to their shares in the fund. Now, Zimbabwe is expected to use the money to offset the adverse effects of the pandemic and to shore up its foreign currency reserves as well. Those have been under considerable strain these past 5 years. The Southern African nation reintroduced its currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, back in 2019 after a decade of using the US dollar among other currencies. But the local unit has struggled for stability amid deep foreign currency shortages. The Zimbabwean dollar is officially trading around 86 against the American dollar, but it's significantly weaker at about 150 to the greenback on a thriving parallel market. Owners of small businesses in South Sudan are struggling to adapt to the numerous challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. But, as CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports, some of these SMEs say that high taxes are forcing them to shut down.
Anthony Moga is a 23-year-old who owns a restaurant in the capital, Juba. Moga started using the internet to communicate with his clients when the country went into lockdown due to COVID-19. He sends out messages through WhatsApp, Facebook. He also sends short messaging service or SMS. Moga supplies more than 80 people with food in a day compared to about 30 people he used to serve prior to going online. However, he says his business faces a number of challenges.
On the side of the city council, whereby you find the taxes are too high, and there are some taxes which are imposed whereby you don't understand the reasons why they tax on this, and they don't demand. If you demand for further explanation, you're not given to.
One information communications technology expert says online business could have a bright future in the country.
One of the things that will need to be available for online businesses to prosper in South Sudan is access to capital, giving youth the tools that they need to make sure that these businesses work.
Another challenge for many here is that the internet infrastructure is still very poor. Some experts say only 10% of South Sudan's population has access to internet. The government says it is working to connect the entire country with mobile networks, and that would also connect the larger population to the internet. South Sudan's capital, Juba, is not yet properly demarcated. When it rains, some of the roads within the city become impassable, making it difficult to locate clients for online businesses. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
One last story for you. This one's from China. The housing ministry over there has published rules to better regulate the rental market in the country. Now, the rules aim to protect tenants' rights, but also to improve standards for long-term apartment rentals. Curbs have been imposed on several measures used by rental firms to attract clients. And they say these measures may heighten some financial risks, particularly if the rental company is unable to pay landlords on time. In the meantime, the government has reiterated that houses are for living and not instruments of financial speculation. I'll leave you there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. In global business, we'll be heading over to South Africa. The latest data from the country's statistics office makes for very grim reading. Unemployment at a record high of 34.4%, 7.8 million South Africans effectively out of work. So where does the country go from here? We'll explore that live from Johannesburg at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Roma. We'll see you at the top of the hour. But now let's take a short break and return your sport news, including fireworks display highlights the opening ceremony of the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics with no fans.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment